like to tell you I'm happy to be here, but why start with an untruth?
The ruler they used looks worse than the sheath.
He gave the impression that he did not want to be there or perform his duties as a judge.
Why can't they just release a photo of this sheath inside the crime scene?
In the Bryan Kohberger Idaho 4 case, taking a closer examination of some of the exhibits that are coming out recently, one major question is, when did Bryan Kohberger actually come up on the radar of law enforcement?
Yeah, and then there's questions about the knife sheath. I'm a little confused.
Attorney Andrew Myers here on About the Law with Yolie Medina. Hello, Yolie. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
So separately and together, I'm fine, thank you. Separately and together, we've been taking a closer look at some of the documents, photographs, and reports that have been released by the Idaho State Police. And this case is making less sense to me. Am I wrong?
No, no, you're not. And I wonder if my eyes, like I need better glasses, but something's not right. I don't know.
No, I don't think you need better glasses. I think, I did an episode with Unfiltered Lucky some time ago, and he's going to appear briefly at the later on in this episode because he knows a lot about knives. But what I told him was that when the Moscow police reports first started coming out, I was reading them and making notes, and my intent was to write an overall summary of the case based on all these reports. But what I told him was, the more I read, the less they fit together. It's like you went to the toy store and bought a puzzle, but instead of having all pieces for that puzzle, there were different pieces of different puzzles, and they didn't fit together.
They don't. I'm confused.
So my first question, you did more research on the knife than I did, but I just don't understand, when it was that Bryan Kohberger first came up on the radar of law enforcement. They've made several different contradictory statements. The first one came up on the probable cause affidavit, the good old probable cause affidavit, which a lot of people say, well, it's been discredited, and that's fine. You can say that. But remember, this was an affidavit that was filed in court, filed under oath and signed. And this affidavit points out that they may have had Mr. Kohberger on their radar as early as November 29th. On November 25th, 2022, Moscow Police Department asked local law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for a white Hyundai Elantra, or all of the Elantras in the area, on November 29th, approximately 12:28 a.m., Washington State University police officer Daniel Tiengo queried white Elantras registered at that school. As a result of that query, he located a 2015 white Elantra with a Pennsylvania license plate LFZ 8649. Now, this vehicle was registered to Bryan Kohberger, hereafter Kohberger, residing at 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment 201 in Pullman, Washington. Now, 1630 Northeast Valley Road is approximately 3/4 of a mile from the intersection of Stadium Way and Cougar Way, last camera location that picked up the white Elantra. Then that same day, November 29th of 2022, at approximately 12:58 a.m., Washington State University officer Curtis Whitnam was looking for white Hyundai Elantras and located a 2015 white Elantra at 1630 Northeast Valley Road in Pullman in the parking lot. 1630 Northeast Valley Road is an apartment complex that houses WSU students. Officer Whitman also ran the car, and it returned to Kohberger with a Washington tag. I reviewed Kohberger's Washington State driver's license information and photograph. This license indicates that Kohberger is a white male with a height of 6 feet and weighs 185 pounds. Additionally, the photograph of Kohberger shows that he has bushy eyebrows. Kohberger's physical description is consistent with the description of the male that Dylan Mortensen saw inside the King Road residence on November 13th.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this on November 29th, this officer in Pullman, Chris Whitman, he's already saying that he saw the license plate that had bushy eyebrows. Okay. But
Yeah.
had Dylan already given that description on November 29th? Didn't she start giving that description later on?
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And the other point is that, there were questions about whether she even said bushy eyebrows.
Right. And yeah. So anyway, that's all I wanted to point out.
No, that's a good observation. So this is the first date that we're given, is that someone somewhere over in Washington State University, which is only, 9 miles or so away from 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, they've got their eye on him on that date. So here's an Idaho State Police Forensic Services evidence submission receipt, indicating that certain evidence has been submitted to the forensics lab in Idaho. And look at the date that the evidence was received, on December 5th of 2022. And look at this. Look at this. Brian Kohberger's name is on here. Brian Kohberger's name is on a report that is dated on December 5th of 2022.
Right.
So now we have the Washington State University police noticing Brian Kohberger, bushy eyebrows, Hyundai Elantra on November 29th of 2022. And then we have the date of evidence that was received December 5th of 2022. And Brian Kohberger's name is listed clearly on this report with a box checked, suspect.
Now, I don't know why his name would be there if they didn't already have his name to put there. There could be something about auto-populating, that once you get a suspect and you enter it into a program, it auto-populates the name. But I don't know why they would have that in such documents such as this, because it could create confusion. So it looks to me like they knew of Brian Kohberger as of the date of this document, at least the Moscow Police Department.
Well, so far we have Washington State University police seeing a license plate on a car and a person with bushy eyebrows named Brian Kohberger, November 29th, just a few weeks after the crime. Then we have this forensics report dated December 5th with Brian Kohberger's name on it. But law enforcement, after the guilty plea by Mr. Kohberger, came out and said, no, we didn't know about him until December 19th. And they were very adamant about that. In fact, Ashley Jennings was interviewed, and she was very adamant that that was the first time that they knew anything about, that she knew anything about Brian Kohberger.
Yes, when we heard the name on December 19th, at that point, that's really all we had was a name. And it was a new name. It was a name I'd never heard before. No one on our team had ever heard before.
So how do we reconcile those three things? Now, after the sentencing hearing in late July of 2025, there was a press conference with Bill Thompson and the Idaho State Police and all these other police officers, patting each other on the back, that how we worked together and we got our conviction and we got our man and we all worked together. So, you were trying to reconcile the forensics report. I was trying to reconcile the fact that, they probably weren't talking to each other. When I was a reporter, I found that police didn't really cooperate. They didn't, one agency might be working one end of a case and another agency would be working another end of the crime, and they would be running around in circles. Is that what happened here? Instead of patting each other in the back in the end of the case, where they all said, "Oh yeah, we worked together, we got our man," were they not working together, or did they have Kohberger on their radar on November 29th or December 5th or December 19th? Which is it, guys?
Yeah.
Which is it?
Confusing. Very confusing.
I won't acknowledge it's confusing. I will acknowledge that stories aren't straight. I think we're thinking clearly. I think other people who have noticed this have been thinking clearly. I'm not confused. I'm saying that there's a problem with what we've been told in this case. I think that's the problem. I think they're the ones thinking that they'll try and confuse us, and they haven't. I mean, just because the guy took a guilty plea. We did a previous episode about 31 different cases that were documented in a report where people have pled guilty to crimes they did not commit, as proven in later DNA, blood work, fingerprints. So,
and I will say this one thing. When Judge Hippler said that his DNA was found at the crime scene, and that that raises probable cause every day, twice on Sunday. Remember that quote?
I do.
Well,
I do.
That wasn't an accurate statement. His DNA was found on a knife sheath that was at the crime scene, and the knife sheath is a movable object. So it wasn't on the stairs of the house. It wasn't on any of the furniture. It was on a movable object, and it was trace DNA. So judges may not totally understand what the differences are, how to understand the information, so that they don't say blatantly that his DNA was at the crime scene. Technically, that is true, but on the other hand, the scene had a movable object, and that was a knife sheath. So you have to presume that the unaliver took the knife sheath there, and that's a big presumption.
That's a big presumption, and we have to prove something in court beyond all reasonable doubt. There's doubt there. Now, I have doubt on another document that, do you remember back in early 2023, there was going to be a preliminary hearing at which, Mr. Kohberger's defense attorneys were going to be there and able to cross-examine the witnesses and examine and question the evidence. Remember that? And then they went behind everybody's back. The prosecution did, and they got a grand jury indictment. Remember that little detail? So you and I, at the same time, we're going over this document that was just very recently released. This is the state's Exhibit S1 to the motion to reclaim exhibits. Yolie, what the hell is this? K-bar knife and sheath sample, grand jury exhibit 64. They went behind everybody's back and showed them a sample K-bar knife and sheath to the grand jury. Really?
Well, not only does it appear that they showed it to the grand jury, because it could have been an exhibit that was never used, but most likely they showed it to the grand jury, because if you had found a K-bar knife and a sheath, whether at the property or somewhere else, let's say they found the knife somewhere else, they found the sheath there, why would you need a sample of it? In other words, I understand that they wanted to use that little dollhouse for I shouldn't call it dollhouse. The little.
Oh yeah, I remember they actually called it a dollhouse. No, you're right. And then later on, they said it shouldn't be called a dollhouse. Yeah. But no, I remember. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So they wanted to use the sample house because the original house was destroyed. So I don't understand why they would want to use a K-bar knife, because a knife was never found. Okay. And a sheath sample. I mean, these are samples. They're not the real item that was found. So I'm confused. I don't know why they would do that.
Well, when you go to a grand jury, there is no one there on the other side. That's why that horrible old saying, "Oh, you could indict a ham sandwich," is true, because the ham sandwich can't defend herself, because the prosecution goes to the grand jury, and they obviously have a lot of authority. We're up here and you're down there, and we're the state, we're the prosecution, we're all law and order. And so the people in the grand jury are just sitting there looking at all of this, and they bring in a sample K-bar knife and sheath. I mean, that borders on, we all have ethical rules we must follow, and falsifying evidence is one of those rules. I understand that they may well have, and I don't know because obviously I wasn't in the room at the grand jury, but I would certainly hope and expect and pray that they explain to the grand jury, oh, it wasn't this knife, this is a sample, and they made it very clear that this was an exemplar, as the law often calls it, or, you know, not the real one, this is a model, and we're just showing it to you to make. I would hope that they made it very clear when they went before the grand jury. But I have my questions, and I have my questions as to whether any ethical guidelines were crossed here by the state of Idaho when they took in, you know, a phony model sample K-bar knife and sheath. So,
well, not only that, but they actually submitted this exhibit with a sample K-bar knife and sheath to the court, to Hippler's court, as evidence. Because those are they filed that motion to reclaim the exhibits they used as evidence in a motion. So they presented this sample to Judge Hippler as evidence. And I'm sorry, demonstrative evidence is one thing, and that's in a trial. But if you're doing a motion, you got to have admissible evidence. And so since everything's sealed, we don't know if the defense objected to submitting this exhibit as evidence because everything's sealed. We're waiting on the motions and limine and all those motions to be unsealed. That's what we're waiting for.
at the very least, this is troublesome.
Well,
This is very troublesome that a model is taken into the grand jury, and the grand jury has shown a model, and because it's a secret proceeding, we just don't know how it was presented, and we just don't know whether the wool was pulled over the grand jury's eyes and whether there are serious ethical violations with bringing this type of evidence before a grand jury, especially to your point, as you said earlier. We don't know if that was the weapon. We don't know. You can guess that. But in a case where you're talking about taking somebody's life away and there is obligation to prove everything beyond a reasonable doubt, I think it's a reasonable question. Why don't we take a look at the knife?
Sheath.
Here we go. So these pictures were taken on 11/17. I don't know. Based on everything we've said, I don't know if this is the knife sheath that they found there or not. But I mean, here's one picture that was taken on November 17th, 4 days after it was said to have been. And that's another issue. It was said initially to be found just next to Madison Mogen's leg. And then it was later reported that it might have been under her. So we don't know. But in a crime scene that has been described as one of the most gruesome that the responding officers have ever seen, I don't know about you, but this knife sheath looks pretty clean, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in knife sheaths, but if it was in a pool, I mean, the bed must have been pooled with red stuff. So I would imagine it would have been soaked, but it just looks like a new knife sheath. Look at
that. Looks like a new knife sheath there.
Mm-hmm.
That looks almost brand new, like you just got it off of Amazon.com or the local Army Navy store. I don't know. Looks pretty clean to me. And then they say here in this item 11/17/2022, apparently some material was picked up. Trace material was found in those two teeny tiny little green squares.
And it's not the snap.
No.
It's the strap.
And there's no mention ever of those two tiny little pieces. No mention anywhere. Now we get to the, that looks like brand new leather. I'm sorry. That looks like brand new leather that's never been used ever. Not to mention that Mr. Kohberger might have bought it way back in March and transported it out to Washington State and then carried it to Moscow, Idaho. That looks like it's brand new, doesn't it?
It does.
That looks brand new. There's nothing on it at all. And they said that the DNA had been found on the button snap.
That's what I thought.
Trace material collected. They don't say anything about the button snap in this photograph. They just say that trace material was found in that little green square.
But does that little green square look like hair? Or am I?
It might be. It looks like a teeny tiny piece of hair, but I mean, might just be the photograph too.
Yeah.
Might just be the photograph. There's another picture showing a couple of teeny tiny little areas. Trace material collected. I've got to squint at it because, there it is. There it is. And another one. Item 1, 11/17/2022, trace material. How come we've never heard about these other little pieces of trace material?
Well, yeah, they've talked about having stains of red stuff.
Right, that's true.
But is it trace? I think, I guess it could be considered trace. I don't know.
And this is apparently the bag, the evidence collection bag that was used.
They swabbed the sheath, and the swab was transported to Othram Labs.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I thought I heard Bill Thompson at one point saying that they transported the sheath to the lab.
No.
There's a picture of the sheath. It's about 14 inches. There's another picture of the other side. So that's the front side. And that's the back side. I don't know. These almost look like the images that we saw on Amazon.com when this case first came out. We all went to Amazon.com and looked, and then they had a picture of a nice clean knife sheath.
Right. And then there are other pictures of a knife sheath.
Here are the other pictures right here.
Oh.
Now these are dated. Why are these dated December 5th?
And December 5th is the date that appears on the document when Bryan Kohberger's name appears.
Yeah, the one we looked at earlier in this episode. Yeah.
Now this one looks darker. It looks like, I don't know. This one looks different. It looks, I don't know if it's my eyes, but
I don't know if it's the lighting either. I don't know if it, you can do a lot of stuff with lighting. But this one looks.
It definitely looks darker.
Look at the shading right in there. It looks like there's some shading right in that area, up in this area. So,
so this one looks different. So,
it
and
does.
a different ruler, right?
A dirty ruler. And we have we're coming up to a comment really soon about that, but that's another story. Usually, I have seen many pictures in various cases, and you use a nice clean ruler. I could take 2 minutes and go to my office and show you a nice clean sterling aluminum ruler that's clean, and you can read it very clearly. And this is like, it looks like they took it out of some high school kid's locker after he left it in there all summer. I don't know. And so
It looks different.
Area swabbed. Item 1.5. Note only inside surface swabbed. So, they had all of those little squares identifying the trace amounts previously. Why isn't there a little arrow pointing exactly to, the area of the button snap that was identified?
I don't know. I don't know if somebody misspoke initially and said button snap instead of strap. But all of a sudden, they started talking about the strap. And I remember the button snap, because people were saying, oh, DNA wouldn't last long on the snap.
And it doesn't last long on brass. It lasts, only up to so many hours, a few hours on brass. I remember that too.
True or not, but I remember people saying that.
I do too. So now here's another document that we were going to look at.
Yeah, this is dated on June 13th, 2023, and it's a law supplemental narrative from the Moscow Police Department. And the evidence, this is alleged evidence that they collected was item 733, a K-bar, item 734, K-bar sharpener, item 735, vegan supplements. And then the narrative says, on Tuesday, June 13th, 2023, Detective Darren Gilbertson from ISP, Idaho State Police, provided me with 3 packages he obtained by ordering the items from Amazon. Detective Gilbertson stated he purchased the items in the same fashion used by Kohberger to purchase a K-bar with a sheath, a K-bar sharpener, and a bottle of supplements. Okay, so I don't understand what the purpose was of recreating what Brian Kohberger purchased and actually getting a sample of the knife, K-bar sheath, K-bar sharpener, and vegan supplements. I don't understand why they would ever do that.
And look at this. This is June 13th of 2023. More than 7 months after the crime on November 13th of 2022. And they're still obtaining what they call evidence. They call it evidence.
I know, that's what I don't understand. It's not evidence it's not. It could be demonstrative evidence, but at best, but there was no K-bar knife ever found at the scene. So to try to, they would have to tie that into what the medical examiner said, but the medical examiner has never testified in court that and even if the medical examiner did testify that it was consistent, then the next question is, could it be consistent with the machete? Could it be consistent with something else? And they might say, yes, it could be consistent with that. Yeah. Could it be consistent with the steak knife? Yeah. The medical examiner would need to be cross-examined on this issue. But the point is, there was never a knife found. So I don't understand this.
So they had to go and buy one. And the other thing is, this tells me that the state of Idaho was not ready to try their case at this time. They were bluffing with the Kohberger defense, saying, "Oh, you wanted a speedy trial? Okay, let's go." And they cornered the Kohberger defense into, waiving their right to a speedy trial. This document here confirms that the state of Idaho was not ready to try their case.
Yeah, apparently there's photographs of the packages along with the order. See the second paragraph? I photographed the packages and the content and the order paperwork. And I was looking for those photos, but there's so many photos, I couldn't find it. If I do find it, I'll talk about it later.
Interesting.
So they say that the grand jury, Brian Kohberger, when was he indicted?
I think it was May, wasn't it?
Yeah, May of 2023 he was indicted. So this is all after he was indicted. So if they purchased the knife, sample knife sheath, knife, and the other items after the grand jury, then what samples did they show to the grand jury?
Did they buy more than one?
I don't know. Anyway, I'll look for the receipt because the photograph of the receipt will show when they bought it. But here, they go to the medical examiner's office and they check out the K-bar knife that they booked into evidence that was purchased from Amazon. And they temporarily released it to him like it's some piece of evidence that is very important when it's just a sample.
So I'm looking at this third area that you highlighted on the screen, and law enforcement removed the K-bar knife from the sealed package and showed it to the doctor. And the medical examiner stated the shape and size of the K-bar knife was consistent as being the weapon, which could have caused the injuries on all 4 of the victims. Wait a minute, hold on, back up the bus here. To say that something is consistent with it or could have caused the injuries, that's not beyond a reasonable doubt. This isn't adequate evidence in a criminal case. I mean, if I point out to you on a menu someplace, look, this sandwich looks kind of like the one I had for lunch. That's not beyond a reasonable doubt. If I say that it's consistent with, or this could have been the sandwich I had for lunch, that's not beyond a reasonable doubt. This is bogus.
Well, it certainly calls into question a lot of things, but a knife was never found.
No.
So
No. That's why they had to ask a phony question to this medical examiner. Yes, I understand that they're just, going over it with the medical examiner and it's not in court. But if a question like that were asked of a medical examiner in court, objection sustained.
Most likely, yes. And it could also be consistent with other weapons is what I would surmise based on what they're saying. I mean, a good cross-examiner would say, well, could it be consistent with, some other steak knife, and we would need to hear that from the medical examiner. And if the medical examiner says yes, then this is meaningless. This whole entire meeting with the medical examiner with the fake knife that was never found. I don't get it.
I've watched some very gruesome testimony in some awful cases that required a lot of forensic analysis. And, a trained medical examiner can look at a wound and, say it came from this type of a knife or that type of a knife. But this here, what we see in this report is not to legal standards.
Yeah,
And I think, go ahead.
Could have created these. See, even in the lower paragraph that's not highlighted, continues to say that the K-bar knife could have created these wounds, depending on the depth of the injury. I don't know.
Well, you could go on Amazon.com or you could go to the Kittery Trading Post over the river from where I am, over in Maine, and there are a lot of knives, there are a lot of selections, there are a lot of choices. I am not a hunter. I am not an expert in knives, but I've heard testimony, and this doesn't meet the burden. So let's get back to one of the things that started our inquiry, and that is this document that shows that a K-bar knife and sheath sample were shown to the grand jury exhibit 64. And it's like, I don't know. That raises a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions about, what are the photographs of what was shown to the grand jury? They didn't have a knife, but they wanted to show the grand jury a knife. I mean, even if they were clear, and we don't know, but even if they were clear that the grand jury, ladies and gentlemen of the grand jury, this is an exemplar or demonstrative evidence, or, this is a sample that we bought just to show you what it might be like. Even with all of those qualifications, it builds up an image in the grand jury's mind. Oh, that must have been it. So we have a lot of questions about that knife. And we were going to try and get lucky for this episode, and we'll still try and get him for another episode, because he's a bright guy, and he does know a lot about knives. He himself said that he's not an expert, but he knows a lot more about knives and about leather and about sheaths and about all that kind of stuff. So he and I went back and forth this week discussing this, and we couldn't get a time together to do this, but he agreed to let me use just a couple of quick comments that he made. And one of his comments was, if there was a knife shown, and we're not saying there was, we're not saying there wasn't, but if there was a knife actually found at the crime scene, why don't we have a photograph of it? And yes, I know there's questions about this, but he says it better than I do.
If this knife sheath was not laying directly under one of the victims in a pool of body fluid, and that's the reason that it looks so clean, then why can't they just release a photo of this sheath inside the crime scene? I mean, we know that they don't want to release photographs of the victims. And like I said, I get that. But if this knife sheath wasn't anywhere near one of the victims, and it was at the foot of Maddie's bed, and that's the reason that it looks so clean, then why wouldn't they be able to release a photograph of that? Why wouldn't they be able to release a photograph anyway? You know, why wouldn't they be able to just blur out the victims and show us where this knife sheath was found?
I think that's a really good point. I mean, and there is a picture that he displayed in his presentation of a bedroom and other stuff. And it's pretty, I've seen other photographs where things are blurred out. And with current photographic technology that, you know, even people like me have, you can blur stuff out. So I thought that was a really good point that he had made. I really did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there it is. Well, there, I said, there it is. I don't know what I'm saying when I say there it is, because I don't know what that is. That's a sheath that is in the Idaho State Police documents. Oh my goodness. That was in with about what, 2,300 or 2,500 pages of material,
Yeah.
including fingernail clippings and, you know, those things you use to floss your teeth. And oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. There was a lot of material in there. So, we do have viewer comments. Why don't I, while I fumble around and find our viewer comments, why don't you give us your closing thoughts?
I'm just not following what's happening with the evidence and the paperwork. It's not clear to me at all, at least what we're talking about here. And the reasoning behind showing the grand jury, if they did show it, because it's an exhibit to the grand jury, the reason for showing the knife, the sample knife sheath and the sample knife, showing it to the grand jury, and then submitting it to the judge, to Judge Hippler as evidence in a motion. So Judge Hippler, I don't know if he has seen the real knife sheath that was found at the scene, or if he was only shown a sample of the knife sheath and a knife which was not found at the scene or found anywhere else.
Okay, fair enough. And so before we go to our viewer comments, there was one other quote that I meant to bring up earlier in this episode, and so I'll bring it up now. This is Payne talking about the knife sheath. As I entered this bedroom, I could see two females in the single bed in the room. Both Goncalves and Mogen were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogen's right side when viewed from the door. The sheath was later processed and had K-Bar, USMC, and the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA left on the button snap. See, there we questioned that before. There it is in the PCA, to the extent the PCA still has any relevance, left on the button snap of the knife sheath.
Not
So there it
strap.
Right. Right. Okay, that brings us to viewer comments. Do you want evens or odds?
I'll take evens.
I love this comment. Remember, you commented about the ruler? Well, so did at Smiling 4206. The ruler they used looks worse than the sheath. It's true. It's true. I could go in my office and show you a nice clean ruler like you use for photographs like this, and experts that I have used for various cases. You know, they come in with mechanical tools, and you know what I mean. It's all stuff that, you know, it's been measured. It's not like you get it off the shelf at Walmart. It's been, you know, calibrated and set up and tested, and it's just so. In any event, in Idaho, they want to use a ruler that looks like they picked it up off the floor in Walmart behind a shelf. Anyhow, all right.
Okay, this is from Nothing Half-Assed. Judge,
Half-asked. Say that carefully. Nothing half-asked.
asked.
Asked.
Okay. Judge Hippler has consistently acted as if he were the part of the prosecution. He never showed that he was protecting Brian's rights or ensuring fairness in the court proceedings, which is a key part of his role. From his very first words, he gave the impression that he did not want to be there or perform his duties as a judge. Such behavior is unprofessional and leads the public to believe that the justice system is neither valued nor upheld in this case. If he worked in my state, I would be embarrassed by the negative impression he has given to the world. Wow.
I wish I could say I was happy to be here, but why start with a mistruth?
Yeah, I had high hopes for Judge Hippler at first. But it just deteriorated, and I don't know why, but it just deteriorated his demeanor.
It did. It did. Enough said. Number 3 from Love My Two Grandsons. The man that Molly saw was the undercover cop, Tisdale, during one of the loops that he and Rosendahl made. In one of Payne's reports, he drove the route in the undercover car and stated that the silver car looked tan under the orange streetlights. Regarding the Sheath, why would they jump through hoops to figure out the source of touch DNA when they had unknown male blood evidence that was never analyzed? Based on what has come out so far, the single source of touch DNA is the only evidence against Bryan Kohberger. And that's why this is so important. I'm sure there are commenters down below that are saying, well, you're really parsing this. You're really going through this. You're really being picky. No, where this is the only evidence they had that tied Bryan Kohberger to the events of November 13th, 2022, this is crucial. This is really important.
And the only evidence they had was a movable object. And because it's a movable object and you don't have a point of entry establishing Bryan Kohberger entering the house, I don't know how you get to that conclusion that he's the one who did the unalivings.
Especially by beyond a reasonable doubt. Especially beyond all reasonable doubt. It makes no sense.
All right. This is from Mark Jones, 1337. One guy versus 5 housemates. So guy stabs first housemate. 4 housemates don't hear a thing. Guy stabs second housemate. 3rd housemates don't hear a thing. Guy stabs 3rd housemate. 2 housemates don't hear a thing. Guy stabs 4th housemate. Last housemate didn't hear a thing, but does see her housemate lying in the doorway, but thinks she's drunk. Then cops are phoned 8 hours later. Yeah, okay.
I think that's self-explanatory.
But they did hear things. That's we come to learn that the 2 surviving roommates did hear certain things. But, this just shows the ridiculousness of it.
Yeah, I think this is the comment of the week, with the exception of the ruler looking worse than the knife sheath. Our commenters are pretty on top of things. They really are. And the final one is from Tina Ryan. She's a regular, and she says the sheath is like John O'Keefe's pristine shoe, presented by the prosecution as evidence in the Karen Reed trial. Touché. Excellent comment. And speaking of the Karen Reed trial, please like, subscribe, and share. And we have 2 characters from the Karen Reed trial that are going to hammer that point home.
Pay for a subscription?
I do not.
Ask it differently. I'm going to allow that.
Well, you know now because you follow. You pay for a subscription?
I do not.
Did you get one for free?
Yes. I was not paying to any social media.
All right, Mr. Brennan.
Sorry, I have just a few more questions.
It's denied.
I was not paying to any social media.
Okay.
Okay, like, subscribe, and share. Most people like that little skit, but there have been a few people that didn't like it. And to those people, I will say, as soon as we hit 50,000 subscribers, I'll ditch it. But until then, I'm going to, expose you to it every week. So,
All right.
I don't have any closing thoughts. I think you summed it up well, and our commenters summed it up well. I would only say that, like I said before, I thought that as these documents came out, I like to write. I used to be a reporter. I've written a lot of stuff. I thought that as these reports came out, I would sit down, and I've taken notes. I have a whole file full of my notes. I thought that I would be able to take the Moscow State Police reports, the Idaho State Police reports, and the photographs and write a nice, concise summary. But the pieces don't fit together. They just don't.
And there are other transcripts that we haven't seen that the defense has. And I did a short video on that there is a transcript of Bethany Funk, who was interviewed by Rich Batanti. He's the guy, the investigator. And so we haven't seen those transcripts. And like, maybe there's something in there that would have caused Brian Kohberger to plead guilty, or there's other people listed in those transcripts. So I'm hoping that those transcripts will be attached to the motions that are going to be unsealed shortly by the judge, because that was just an exchange of information. In other words, Ann Taylor just exchanged all those transcripts. She gave them to the prosecution as part of supplemental discovery. So they're not actually filed with the court, is what I learned. So that's that.
So let's file there's a procedure in Idaho outside of the FOIA requests. There's a procedure where we can get stuff. But that's a fantastic point that you just made, because remember, long time ago, an affidavit was filed in this case by Richard Batante, who had talked to Bethany Funk.
Or he wanted to talk to her. He either wanted to talk to her because she had information that was...
That's where I was going with that. She had exculpatory information. Remember, she didn't want to go back to Idaho, and I don't blame her. She didn't want to go back to Idaho, and she didn't want to go back for the preliminary hearing. And as it turns out, she didn't have to, because the prosecutors went behind everybody's back and did a grand jury proceeding. But he said that she had exculpatory information, and he filed an affidavit to that effect. Thank you, everyone. Be nice, be kind. Down in the comments section, we love your comments, but if you don't like something that somebody else says, don't be a 5-year-old in the schoolyard and call them a name. Start a new chain and tell us what you feel, why you feel that way. Cite some law, cite some facts. Tell us something that you've read that makes more sense than what you think we're saying. So I like to keep the comments section on a pretty high plane, and I see it's getting better. I know I say this every week, but I think it is getting better. Be nice, be kind. Have a good one. Whether you are in the grocery store, the gas station, or anywhere else, please remember to be kind to people. You don't know what they're going through. And the same goes for our comments section. We want you to comment, but be nice, be kind, be positive if you can. And thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Have a good one.